this video is just, it's going to get really dark. There's going to be a lot of stuff. I'm not kidding when I'm saying that people might cry off of this, that people will get angry. I got very angry reading a lot of these, and I just hope that you will enjoy what you're about to experience. Thanks.
What is your childhood memory that you thought was normal but realized it was traumatic later in your life? My mom used to give me enemas when I misbehaved. I didn't realize until I made a joke about it during my first semester of college and everyone looked at me in stunned silence that it was not a normal punishment. She and my stepdad were both quite abusive, but we lived on a ranch away from any town and I didn't have a lot of outside contact. So, it wasn't until college that I understood how abnormal my life had been. Imagine me, sitting around with other college freshmen, joking about how awesome it was to be away from our parents, and that is what pops out of my mouth. Ha! A whole new world opened up after that. I consider college to be when my real life began.
Commentary time. So let's just get this straight. Basically, this guy just said that his parents, instead of saying, go get the belt, they would say, Ma, get the fire hose because we about to put this up this boy's butt. Now, I don't know about you, but I thought whoopings were bad, but this is on a whole nother level. And reading more of the comments in the thread, it apparently, as crazy as this sounds, it seems like this is actually fairly common for other places that are not in the city. And so I just think it's really crazy that first of all, I just hope that this was with water, nothing really bad, because I heard that people can do this with bleach, and I just think that this is just really crazy, but it just goes to show that there's like no limit to human imagination, for good or for worse. When it was my weekend with my dad, I would be dropped off at people's houses, and I thought it was fun because it was all so different and I got to meet new people. When I got older, I realized it was neglect, and he was palming me off while he went elsewhere. My best friend's mom did that to her in elementary school. We'd hear a knock at the door and find her sitting on the porch with her bag. Her mom never told us she was coming. She just jumped her there for a few days so she can go off and do who knows what. I never understood at the time because I was just excited that my friend was staying at my house for a week. But no, I realized her mom just didn't want to take care of her. My dad fought hard to get joint custody of me, and then I would stay with him one weekend, a month, and a whole month in the summer. At the time, I thought, hey, cool, there's new places to explore and a convenience store a short walk away. Or that I'd get to spend a month in the summer with my cousins. It didn't dawn on me until much later that he wanted joint custody so he wouldn't pay as much child support. He didn't actually spend all that much time with me personally. For that summer month, he dropped me off at his mom's, and I wouldn't see him again until he came back to pick me up at the end. One weird example was when my older brother and I asked for Digimon starter decks for Christmas, but my mom and her boyfriend only had money for one for my brother. I got some cheap squirt guns or something. My mom had to leave for whatever reason, and I was pouting. My mom's boyfriend asked me what was wrong, and I told him I didn't get a Digimon deck. He went over to my brother and asked him if that was true. My brother looked scared and said yes, and all I remember is him hitting my brother all over and my brother screaming, trying to crawl away while he dragged him by his legs from the living room into the kitchen, hitting him all over. Then I remember him throwing him an ice pack. It was normal because we were all beat all the time, and it only seemed fair he should get beat real bad since he got the Digimon deck, but I didn't. Now I just want to unpack this one real quick because I think this is just, when you are in the madness, you become part of the madness. If you see here, this guy is saying that he thought that his brother deserved a beating because he got the Digimon deck when he didn't, and that therefore he deserved that beating, so that way there would be balance. And it's just kind of interesting to see like the way your mind sort of twists and tries to make sense of a lawless world, or a world where things that shouldn't make sense have to make sense, otherwise it kind of breaks your psyche. And so I just think it's really crazy to hear the fact that, oh, we know that we're going to get beatings, but that's the price of a Digimon deck. In my experience, logical people usually don't abuse children. That actually helped me as a child to realize that some abuse was actually abuse, because the abuse was already normalized, but the situations and justifications were illogical. My biggest example was that my mom shoved me through a door, then slapped me because I broke my door. If it literally doesn't make any sense, you can't claim that it is normal or excusable. And I would just like to piggyback off of this and say that, yeah, I was reading a lot of the comments and everyone was talking about, yeah, if you get a whooping or any kind of physical violence is abuse. And I would agree with that, because a lot of times you're dealing with parents who are frustrated with their own situations, that they take their anger out on you as their child because you're an easy target in a sense. Not that they're physically or they're mentally preparing and saying, oh, I'm going to beat my child when they do something wrong. It's more of just an easy way out. And it's kind of hard to say that, but a lot of people felt that, oh, this is right because it taught my child a lesson. But there's a lot of different ways you can handle teaching a child a lesson without having to go through this. And we'll go through more examples, but you'll see that a lot of times it usually has the opposite effect, or gets it to the point where your child gets so angry that they try to fight back.
For some reason I have been always scared of my mom. I have mental health problems and have been in and out of therapy for the past 7 years. I once mentioned to my dad how often I would have a babysitter, and my dad confessed that whenever I was with a babysitter, it was because my mum would go immediately to a bar and drink till she was blackout drunk, while my dad was working night shifts. My mum would then come home and mentally and physically abuse me. But my babysitter made a closet game where I would hide in the closet until my dad got home to calm her down. My babysitter eventually called CPS, and my mom went into AA. She's doing better now, but she still refuses to give up alcohol, and still mentally abuses me to this day. It sucks, but whenever I see that babysitter, who's now in college, I give her the biggest hug, because I think without her, I probably wouldn't be here right now. For some clarification, my mom suffered from bipolar disorder, and always blamed that in her actions. I still don't like her, but I don't have a choice to move out, because I'm only 16. But on the bright side, with the help of therapy and sadly a plethora of psych ward stays from multiple suicide attempts, I am doing better and have been clean from self-harm for about 1.5 years now.
Now, this is actually a very interesting one, because this is a situation where, again, it's not both parents that are the problem. This is just one parent who is dealing with their own issues, and these issues are being transferred to the child. You have a mom who basically is an alcoholic, and at least she's getting help later on, but literally outside help had to be called in, where a babysitter is practically saving a child. And the damage is still done. This child had to go to therapy, had suicide attempts. It's just been a really rough time. And again, this person's only 16. And just the amount of information that this person was willing to provide, and just to hear their story, it's really tough and really hard to hear. But this is happening to a lot of people, and mental health is a real big problem. And it's not something that you can just take lightly and just say, oh, throw away the key and things like that. These are people, and people have problems and they're going to go through them. And it's not so simple, but it is very hard. And I just like the fact that this person is actually getting help and is being able to is willing to understand what they went through is wrong, and they're trying to get help. And that's kind of all you can really ask for.
When my mum was having a bad day, before I'd leave by myself for primary school, she would say, "If I'm not here when you get back, you know why," implying that she would kill herself because of her stressful life. I'd spend the whole day at school worrying. During fits of rage, my mum would threaten to drive off of the road, off of bridges, to kill herself. With us in the car with her. So scary to constantly worry that she would snap and actually do it. I feel for ya. My mom would do exactly that, where she would speed and swerve dramatically. Why don't I just kill all of us right now? It got to the point where I was bored of her threats and genuinely couldn't wait for the day she'd finally drive us off a cliff. I found it more annoying than scary. She had her weird ways. Yep. Clearest early memories are when my parents were constantly threatening divorce and my mum would wake me up and throw me in the car in the middle of the night. She'd make me say who I wanted to live with, and when I'd start crying because that's a tough question for a kid, she'd say that meant I didn't want her and threatened to crash until I said I loved her more than my dad. They're still together and seem pretty okay now. I will never understand how or why, but they are. My mum would do the same thing. She still does it sometimes. Saying things like, "You keep on doing this and I'll end my life. One day you'll wake up and won't find me." Most of my worries are caused by her behavior. It's not that her life is bad, she's got a loving family and everything for a happy life. She just uses it as a controlling mechanism. My dad would grab a shotgun and storm out, threatening suicide, and then be gone for hours. This would happen several times a year. I knew it wasn't exactly normal, but I didn't realize how awful it truly was until later.
Now I want to just take a break right here to really just break things down and to really process what we just heard. If you really think about it, this is a lot of people having similar stories, talking about the hopelessness that their parents were feeling, and pretty much having the same, echoing the same sentiment across the board. And it's really important to understand that this is not just one person's story, this is many people's stories, and it's important to sort of have empathy towards these people, or sympathy, to understand that this could happen to anyone. And the fact that they have to go through this, and as a child, hearing your parents going through this, and for you to think that this is not going to affect them when they're growing up, it absolutely is going to affect them when they grow up. And it's really unfortunate that they had to go through sort of these things, because when you have parents, you're expecting them to protect you and take care of you. And for you to have to worry about the safety of your own parent and to carry that with you through school, through life, it's just really unfortunate. And it's incredible that these people are telling their story and being able to explain what's going on. I think it's incredible. I think more people should know about this, and it's really a lot to take in. And I'm just glad that I'm able to read this and pretty much discuss this with you guys.
When I was in the 2nd grade, my older sister came into the bathroom while I was taking a bath to play with my toys with me. I didn't find out until later it was because my father was having a stroke from drinking too much and was making sure I didn't finish taking a bath before the paramedics arrived. My mom leaving me at different places with different people for months at a time. Or when we would be driving, I remember there would be times where she would tell me about the school she was going to take me to and that I would live there. I remember her describing the horses they had. Lies? And how much I would love it. She never ended up taking me there, but would always talk about it, like it was some magical place. Found out from my uncle years later it was an orphanage. Only reason she didn't end up taking me is because he threatened to kill her if she did.
My big brother used to give me treats: M&Ms, brownies, cheese, and bread. Only years later did I realize he was sneaking me food because we were not being fed. I am healthy and functional today because a 3-year-old stole food from me. How old were you? I don't have a specific memory of how old I was at the earliest memory, but I remember the room: back room, blanket on the window, dust shimmering in the sliver of light, and the crib and him feeding me through the slates of the crib. So I'm guessing I wasn't more than 2. That would have made him almost also 2 or possibly 3. He's 9 months older.
I'm actually stunningly okay. I got identified in elementary school and had state and school system intervention. He, unfortunately, not so great. I think I was able to attach to him, and so had okay emotional development, but he had no one to attach to and had some major issues that he self-medicated with cocaine for many years. I feel like he was a bit of a sacrificial lamb for me, and there's not much I can do about that except love him and feel guilty. The best thing now is that he has a child of his own and finds a lot of purpose in taking excellent care of her. I think that was ingrained in his soul and where he's most comfortable, but before he had her he was pretty rootless and messed up.
My older sister did this for me as well. I remember she constantly had broken bones, and we joked that she'd be in a full body cast one day. It wasn't until I was older I realized she was skipping lunch at school and bringing it home to me so I'd actually have food to eat. So her poor nutrition made her prone to broken bones.
I lived in a bad neighborhood as a recovering addict. When I had my kids I was clean for 3 years. I moved to the only place I could afford and there was lots of violence and drugs use in the building. After playing outside with my kids I would invite all the kids that wanted to come visit to have dinner and dessert at my house. The parents would stagger in throughout the evening to pick up their kids. I never associated more than needed with the other parents, but they were more than happy that I wanted to watch their asshole kids. They were never bad or inappropriate when they visited. My kids were 4 or 5 at the time and I would have kids as old at 15 just trying to find a quiet place to read or do homework. I don't live in such a bad area anymore, so I don't have kids who truly need a good meal or quality time with someone anymore, but I wish I was in a well enough off place to open a place for these kids to still go.
I just want to take a break right here just to sort of process what we just went over. So we have kids that are basically trying to be the best role model that they can because the parents can't fit that role. You have a 3-year-old that actually knows that I need to feed my baby brother because he needs food. Forget myself. You have a sister who was willing to take on all the poor nutrition and be teased for it just so that the younger brother or the younger child was able to basically have substance and actually be okay. These are pretty much golden standards for older brothers and sisters that are just taking care of the younger siblings because they know that they are the ones in charge. They basically have to take the place of a parent. And it's really crazy how a child can do a better job than a parent can, and a parent could actually act more like a child than an actual child, a 3-year-old, for comparison's sake. And this last one is also really interesting because we have an addict. Again, a lot of people like to say bad things about people who are addicts, but when they get cleaned up and when they get their stuff together, they are actually some of the most kind and helpful people in the world. And the fact that this person who just was recovering, trying to get themselves back on their feet, was taking care of other people's kids because they knew that that's what they would have wanted if they were in their position. It's just really crazy that these people exist because in a bad neighborhood where people feel that there's nothing good there, there's lawlessness, there's these little rays and sunshines of hope that are taking care of people and putting basically taking the role of the actual parents. And this kind of goes into a lot of parents not being ready for children and sort of this situation where, oh, should there be classes to find out if a parent is actually ready to be a parent? Because you have license tests for everything. You have a license test to drive a car. You have tests so that you can go to school, but no one has a test to see if that they can basically control every output of another person's life, especially someone who's young, who's going to hopefully be a boon to society. And it's just really interesting to see that these are some good cases for, hey, maybe we should be getting education to parents and helping them figure out their stuff, get them therapy or get them education on how to raise children. And then just kind of just helping them and helping these kids, because it's crazy that we have to have other people whose job it's not to take care of the kid filling in that role. And it's just really amazing that all this is even happening in the first place. Being 16 and finding out that I was the only one of my peers in that class who was still being beaten by their parents regularly. The oldest anyone was the last time they were physically punished was 10 years younger than I was the night before, the last time I was beaten. My friend used to get punched by his dad, but as my friend got older, he got bigger and stronger too. One day he punched his dad back hard and apparently said something like, "Try me." I don't think he was ever punched again. For me, it only got worse in my teenage years. Disagreeing with my dad about anything would invariably result in multiple slaps in the face. It would probably have been worse if my mom didn't jump in between us to stop him. Ah, I understand this. My mother beat me until I was 18. Her response after that was, "You're too old for me to hit now." So instead, she just verbally abused me 100 times worse than before. I moved out ASAP and haven't spoken or seen my family since. This, for me, my mother tried beating me once I had kids. It was near the holidays and the kids were crying. It was late and my mom had to go to work. She began to spank one of the kids, but I reached out to stop her, and then she went for me. My husband had just dropped me off at my mom's house. It was a 3.5-hour trip. I called him as soon as he got back home, and he had to come pick me up. I wrote Mom a letter about it. I skipped Christmas that year. We never talked about it, but she never raised a hand to me or my kids again. I feel a little sad because I know for the most part she was a great mother, but she was ignorant of proper ways to handle emotions. She probably needed help as a kid, but got much the same treatment. Thankfully, we, as people, are in an educated time now. I just want to just do a quick pause real quick right here. If you have read this correctly, this is a mother who was being beat by her own mother because she was trying to beat her kids. So this is on a whole nother level. Getting a spanking or beating because she was stopping her from disciplining her kids, in a sense. And that's just really crazy and on another level. Could you imagine that you are a grown-up and you have a certain way of raising your own kids, and your parent comes in and says, "I'm going to raise them the way that I raised you," and you say, "No, I don't want that," and then they say, "No, I'm going to punish you the same way." That's really crazy. Just to really wrap my head around the idea of my mother being spanked by my grandmother while she's old. That just doesn't make any sense, and it's mind-boggling to wrap my head around it. I just wanted to focus on that real quick. My dad used to beat me with the belt for all kinds of things. I was 16 when I had decided I'd had enough. I was invited to go to the mall with friends. I was told no. I got upset and slammed the door to my bedroom. Cue the thundering footsteps of my father, with my mom hot on his heels. My dad raised his arm, leather belt clutched in his fist as he yelled about respect. I felt the stinging slap of the belt against my open palm, but I held onto it as he tried to yank it from my grasp. I kept yelling, no. My mom joined in, pulling my long hair so that my head snapped back painfully. I don't know how I managed to hold on to the belt, but he finally let go and slapped me hard on the side of the head. Stars. I was shoved and fell hard against my dresser. They said I was going down the wrong path. I just glared at them. They left me all alone for a bit. I could hear them talking about me. Later they said things had gotten out of hand. Clearly, I had shown I was too old to be spanked, and by the same token, I should behave like a young lady, and not like a lady of the streets, fighting like a man, striking out at my parents, who clearly only wanted what's best for me. Same for me, mate. I can remember him picking me up by my neck and throwing me into a wall, for no reason whatsoever. I crawled into bed and didn't move, absolutely terrified all night, just crying. That feeling of absolute hopelessness, that there is no one to confide in, I still live in now. Often have nightmares of that last beating. It's also one of the last memories I have of him. My parents split up a year or so later, but his life took a very, very dark path. Over the next few years, I saw him a handful of times as he struggled with drink, drugs, and anger. My last memory is slowly reversing out of his driveway. He seemed to be getting a hold of his troubles. We waved goodbye to each other. A few months later, I woke up to the news that he had been arrested. Currently, he is serving a long prison sentence for a horrific crime. The shame brought upon me and the rest of my small family is incomprehensible. It had been a few years since, but every day I ask myself, how did I end up with such an animal for a father? I have never discussed this with anybody in person, not even family. I feel like he should have died a long time ago, when at least I can remember him as a good man.
Great story in my family. My grandfather was a notorious Irish drunk. He would beat my grandmother, aunts, uncle and dad when they were kids. When my uncle was about 14, he saw him hit my grandmother and lost it. He grabbed my grandfather by the throat, pinned him against the wall and punched him so hard he nearly broke his hand and told Granddad if he ever touched Grandma again he would bury him. Granddad went quiet after that, never raising a hand to his family again, and many years later he died in his own misery and his own kids only attended the funeral to make sure the bastard was actually gone. Not a single tear shed. The last time my, now ex-stepfather beat me, I was 14. I let it happen, showed no signs of pain, and that bothered him. So he called my little sister in, who was 8 or 9 at the time, and started whooping on her in front of me. She started to cry and he snickered when he saw the anger and tears swell in my eyes. I pulled the belt from his hands as he drew back and beat his face blue and black. He never touched me or my sisters again, but I found out 4 years later that he had taken a liking to hitting my mom. This was during a fight they were having. I had been through a lot of parental arguments before that, so I thought nothing of it. Until he called my mum a bitch. Even reading the other comments in the op, I promise no one has ever seen anyone as mad as I was when I heard that.
I ran down the stairs. Hey! I screamed at the top of my lungs. I sounded like Kratos from God of War. And I just let all the anger from all the beatings he'd given me and my sisters, all those years, all the anger from the emotional abuse he'd given me. I blacked out, and when I came to, I was being pulled away by the police officers trying to calm me down. Charges against me were all dropped, and I never saw him again. These stories are all connected through violence. It's sad to see the negative effects of abuse, but it's important to read and understand in order to prevent the cycle of violence. Sure, some parents might think that they are right to do what they want with their children, but their child is a human being. There has to be other ways to teach a child other than threats and violence. Parents can blindly think that their way is best, to the point where they forget whatever your age is and just see you as a child, whether you are 4 or 40. Slapping a child in the face, using a belt, choking them, and other forms of punishment are just too much. Listen to these stories of violence where punishment is truly just abuse. Taking out your anger on your child that you're meant to protect is not right. It just teaches a child to lash out against others, and that's how you get bullies. I hope these stories help you all to spread the message of peace in talking to your own children or to others. There's too much violence in this world already, so why not keep it out of our homes? Growing up, every summer we would pick apples at the local orchard. Lots of apples. We would keep some, but most just went to the orchard. I always thought it was just a fun time out. Would pick up apples, give them to Dad to put in his picking bag, see how shiny you could get one and throw out the rotten ones around. 20 plus years later, it finally occurred to me that it was a little weird, so I asked my dad about it. He looked straight at me and quietly said, "With 5 kids, we needed the money." I would save my vacation at work and we would pick apples for the extra money. My parents worked their butts off to provide for us, make enough money to pay for half of our university educations and save for retirement, all while making it fun. Not really traumatic, but eye-opening for me. Huge respect for Mom and Dad. An island of wholesomeness in the sea of sadness. Thanks for your story. My mother used to let me skip school a lot to take me to the hospital to see my older sister. We'd have hospital campouts where I'd sleep in the hospital bed with my sister and she'd sleep in a recliner chair provided for parents. It's now that I realize she'd do that because everyone, doctors, child psychiatrists, social workers, and even friends and family, told her she needed to give me as much good memories with my sister as possible before she died. Surprisingly, that's not the traumatic memory. On those hospital campouts, she used to make me memorize a nursery rhyme. She'd sing it to me, then make me sing it back to her over and over. It was to the tune of Hickory Dickory Dock, because I used to watch Play School a lot. So it was one I loved, but one that wouldn't come up in school. So there was no risk of teachers asking me to play it on accordion, then wondering why I was singing the wrong lyrics. She drilled it so much into my head that I still remember the lyrics. The first verse was about my dad, that he was abusive and that I couldn't be placed with him. The second verse was about my godmother, her name and her phone number, that she had documents to prove the abuse, and that she will take me in.
I realize now that my father was severely abusive to my mother, and my mother was constantly trying to prepare me in case he killed her. Whether it looked like an accident or not, she needed me to be able to tell the police officers that he was abusive, that my godmother's number is size, that she has evidence and will take me in. I learned the nursery rhyme when I was 4. I guess it was the only way she could ensure a 4-year-old would memorize information like that. How did you get out?
Pretty much the kind of way you'd see it portrayed in movies. It came to a head one night. I have vague memories. PTSD leaves a lot of blank spots. Most of the time, when my dad went off, my brother, sister, and I would already be in bed. But that night, I was sick. So my mom had left me in the kitchen for my father to watch me while she put my brother and sister to bed. I vomited, and my father ignored me. My mom came out, saw me crying, and told him gently, "Hon, when your daughter throws up, you have to stop what you're doing and help her." That was all it took. He started throwing plates, and my mom pushed me towards the door. Glass shards went through my feet and torso. I was only wearing a singlet and underwear because I had a fever. I ran upstairs. My brother and I would usually stay in bed when things got bad like that. But this time, he knew I was out there. So he ran out looking for me. I hid in the living room between the couch and the wall while he got the baseball bat he'd gotten for his 12th birthday and stood in front of me. My mother shouted, "Call the cops if your father kills me." I tried, but he cut the phone lines.
Somehow she got us out, and I'll never know how she made the gut-wrenching decision that she had to leave my sister behind in order to get my brother and I to safety and come back with help. But she didn't get any help. The cop was a sexist mid-20s guy who, in spite of my clear injuries, thought my mother was kicking up a fuss just to cause trouble for her husband. He asked my dad to leave for 24 hours, that's it. He did leave, but came back the next day with a gun, broke in and hunted through the house for us. I hid in the cupboard and looked through the slants as he walked by. He couldn't find us, so he just burned all our stuff and left instead. My mother bought us the first tickets for the first flight to the furthest state away, and we flew there with nothing but the clothes on our backs. We never looked back.
Did you ever have to use it or say it? I did have to use it once, but not because he'd killed my mother. I don't quite recall this particular instance. Most of the memories kind of blend together. I have PTSD, so a lot of it is blocked out or entangled. But I know my mother and sister were still in danger. I believe maybe CPS had picked my brother and I up at school after teachers saw injuries on us. I told them the nursery rhyme because all I knew at the time was that it was my way of remembering my godmother's phone number for them to call her when we were placed with her for about a year.
Damn, I thought I was gonna win this one. Skeptical. My dad raped me almost every night until, at age 11, I finally realized it wasn't normal. My mom wasn't involved though. After the court case and everything, I was able to move back in with her and him I haven't seen since the last day of court. But damn, this one chilled my spine.
My parents fighting all night, followed by my dad packing a bag, getting in his car, my mom standing in front of the car so he couldn't leave, then threatening divorce every other day, and then being all over each other on their good days. I have no idea what a healthy relationship was until my husband and I went to marriage counseling, and I saw how toxic that all was and how much it stuck. Sad how many kids grow up without any frame of reference for a positive relationship until probably their teens when they encounter other people's families. I had a friend who grew up in a pretty bad spot. He's married now and once said probably Hal and Lois on TV made him want to get married way more than my own parents. And right here, I just want to comment on the relationships with parents that's going on with a lot of these stories. It's really important to understand that not all relationships are going to be going well. It's really common to have arguments between the parents. But what's important is understanding how to handle these arguments, because a lot of times people get angry and people want to basically show it off in a negative way. And it's really important to make sure that if you ever have kids, to pretty much avoid having that kind of confrontation in front of the kids. Now, there is some like balance that people are saying that needs to be had. Like, it's okay to have disagreements in front of your kids, but you want to handle them in a proper manner so that way your kids can learn from them. Because it's one thing to make it look like there's never been an argument between you and your significant other, but if you show that disagreements occur and you show how to handle them in the right way, it helps the child be able to understand that yes, life is not perfect. People will disagree with you, but you need to know the correct way to handle it and react to it. And reacting in anger is not the right way. Being able to compromise and be willing to compromise is the key to helping with those type of relationships. My best friend at the time and I used to live in this small country town. Everybody knew everyone and it was quiet. Not much happening around town any time of the year. One day, my friend and I were walking up and down the street picking berries off trees when I had to wee, so I hurried home. 3 or 4 houses down from where I was my home, and went about my business. I must have gotten distracted by my Barbies on the way back because about 20 minutes later, my best friend came running back to my house, her thighs covered in blood.
Turned out that our neighbor those few houses up was a pedophile and tried raping her in his backyard. She was being too loud, so he covered her mouth, but she struggled her way out somehow from his grasp. Crawling down the driveway, he caught her, shoved gravel up her vagina and let her go. I still remember my mum and her mum calling the police and looking like they had just witnessed a murder. My friend is doing fine now and lives a happy life after many years in therapy and has gone on to marry a very lovely man too.
What happened to the neighbor? He ended up in jail. I think he did minimum time though, and then moved a few towns over. Everybody put flyers up around of him and what he was. He eventually ended up back in jail for a similar event. I'm not sure what happened to him after that, as we moved a state away. How old were you guys? 5 and 6 at the time. Gravel? What?
I don't know. There was a hearing, and when asked why he had done it, he just chuckled. I don't think anyone that can sit there and rape little girls is going to give you any type of good explanation as to why they would do any of what they do. They're mentally ill. My cousin's extremely religious mother would practice rapture drills with her. This consisted of her mom bursting into her room at like 3 a.m., banging pots and pans together, and screaming, "It's the rapture. The rapture is happening. Will you be saved?" She would then make my cousin confess her sins to her and then tell her that she would be going to hell for her sins. It terrified her. But she thought that this was a normal thing that all families, mothers, do until adulthood, when she casually mentioned it in conversation and the whole room went silent. Her now husband had to explain to her that no, that is not normal.
My mom would tell me to play with my brother because she has to talk to the neighbor. Neighbor comes over and goes straight to the bedroom. My mom closes the door. I'm a child, and I think nothing of it. It kept going on for a while till my dad comes home early. I remember lots of screaming and the dude jumping out of the window. When I was 5, I was home alone. I found a box of matches and brought them to my room. I burned a piece of paper on my carpeted floor, creating a scorch mark in my room. Fortunately, there wasn't a fire. When my dad and stepmom got home, they had put me in the bathtub for a bath. My stepmom was enraged. She grabbed a lighter from her pocket. Then she grabbed my hand. She placed my hand onto the ignited flame for roughly 5 to 10 seconds. Memory is hazy, but I remember. I got caught playing with matches once. Parents gave me a full pack of matches, then made me light each one and hold it as long as I could. Each one. The deeper I go into this thread, the more I'm having flashbacks of things I have forgotten. I need a therapist, I think. This is parents punishing for revenge instead of punishing to teach you. My parents have always punished me based on anger, never to actually teach me what I'd done wrong. And for this, I would like to just piggyback with, that's a very key thing in understanding punishment versus abuse. If your parent is doing something not to teach you a lesson, but just to make themselves feel better, like, oh, you did this to me, so now you have to pay, petty revenge in a sense, then that's when you know that you're dealing with abuse, because your parent is supposed to take care of you. And in these cases, the child was pretty much on their own, and they did something wrong, but they didn't have a parent watching them to pretty much protect them from making this mistake. They're a child. So punishing your child for playing with matches that they shouldn't have had access to in the beginning doesn't make any sense. You're punishing because you messed up, not because they messed up. Oh man, you just reminded me of a neighboring family that was all sorts of dysfunction. The father was really powerless and timid, but terrible. The wife would always scream. I never remember any one time I saw them just talk. It was always arguments and a fight. There was one particular small kid, between 4 and 6 by estimate, had 3 older brothers. The second oldest once hacked a person at a wedding with a machete and was arrested and somehow released shortly after. Typical African thing, y'all. Then one day, and this is where your issue reminded me of in the story, the oldest brother took his kid's hand and put them in an open charcoal fire for almost a minute while unbelievably terrible screams emanated, and we all just watched in horror, being afraid to interfere with the kids. The kid had eaten his boiled sweet potato, I think. I forgot. My brothers, whose house we were staying in, had to go take that kid and tell him they couldn't keep him anymore after he heard about this, until he got tired and advised them against some stuff for handing back their little demon, as he called it. Brother had taken the kid to the hospital and gotten the burns treated.
Then the third oldest found the mom asleep naked and drunk and kinda put his sword inside her exposed sheath. He had sex with her basically, only for her to wake up and catch him and shout at him and about it to all who could hear instead of being ashamed and quiet about it, keeping family trash wrapped up.
The second oldest went to beer with the oldest where they had a fight, and the oldest used a rock to hit the oldest's face, causing a third of his face to peel and hang. The assaulted brother then went to the house, grabbed a huge kitchen knife, I think they still use that knife, not sure, and stabbed the oldest in the side of his lower torso/abdominal area. Bled all over the backseat of my brother's car, who raced to the hospital. He survived. Man, I moved out of there, but I think more horrendous stuff happens every day. Thank God there was no girls there. Wish we had CPS here. That kid's gonna grow up and emulate everything he grew up with. Repeat the whole affair again in his own home one day. I feel like I've commented to death the seriousness of the ramifications of parental behavioral impact on the mind of a child. But again, a child that lives in chaos emulates the same chaos that they were molded by. If you've been affected, go to therapy. It's worth your sanity. And if you know someone, then help them. Help them to get the help that they deserve. I'm sure that a lot of these stories seem like they're out of the ordinary, but you would be surprised to learn how many people you meet that have these sorts of childhood issues. Anywho, I think I've talked enough on parental behavior over this series. End of the line. Hope you enjoyed this series. Comment on which story was your favorite/most hated in the series. Speak to you again soon. Cheers.